Welcome to Underwire History. King John of England, facing a French invasion threat, has begun assembling a naval force to bolster his defences. His Majesty's fleet is still in its formative stages, with a motley crew of ships and sailors hastily gathered from various ports along the English coast. With tensions running high, King John is relying on his network of vassals and nobles to provide financial support for this endeavour, but resources are scarce and loyalty is tested. England's naval capabilities have traditionally been limited by its geography. The kingdom's coastline has historically protected it from major invasions, allowing its armies to focus on continental expansion rather than sea power. The impending threat of a French invasion, however, forces King John to reconsider his priorities and invest in maritime defence, a shift that will have far-reaching consequences for England's military might and international relations. The stormy weather of 1216 has added an extra layer of complexity to these plans, as inclement conditions hamper the assembly and deployment of ships, testing the mettle of King John's leadership. Despite these challenges, the stakes are high. If the French succeed in breaching English defences, it could lead to devastating consequences for the kingdom and its people, including potential occupation and loss of territory. The fate of England hangs precariously in the balance, as the Royal Navy struggles to adapt to the unpredictable seas and the shifting allegiances of its vassals. King John's naval force is still in its formative stages, with a motley crew of ships and sailors hastily gathered from various ports along the English coast. The resources available for this endeavour are scarce, forcing King John to rely on his network of vassals and nobles to provide financial support. However, loyalty is being tested, as some of these vassals may not see the value in investing in a naval force. The geography of England has historically protected it from major invasions, but the threat of a French invasion forces King John to reconsider his priorities. This shift towards maritime defence will have far-reaching consequences for England's military might and international relations. The stormy weather of 1216 is adding an extra layer of complexity to these plans, as inclement conditions hamper the assembly and deployment of ships. King John's leadership is being tested by the challenges facing his naval force, but he must remain focused on defending English interests. If the French succeed in breaching English defences, it could lead to devastating consequences for the kingdom and its people. King John of England assembles a naval force to defend against a perceived threat from France. To overcome these limitations, King John makes strategic decisions about where to allocate resources and how to maximize efficiency. He prioritizes ships and sailors from coastal regions with a history of successful maritime defense, such as Kent and Devon. This calculated approach allows him to build a more formidable naval presence, albeit slowly and incrementally. Despite these efforts, the stormy weather of 1216 begins to take its toll on King John's plans, disrupting supply chains and communication between ships and shore-based troops. The tempests also pose a significant challenge for the assembly and deployment of ships, slowing the progress of the naval force and testing the mettle of King John's leadership. As the situation continues to unfold, King John must navigate these obstacles while remaining focused on defending English interests against the looming threat of French invasion. King John's decision-making is guided by a combination of strategic vision and pragmatism, as he weighs the costs and benefits of deploying his naval force in the face of inclement weather. The king's leadership is being tested by the challenges facing his naval force, but he remains committed to defending English interests. Institutional responses to the crisis are shaped by existing power structures and governance constraints, with the monarch holding significant authority over military matters. However, the limitations imposed by the stormy weather also highlight the importance of effective communication and coordination between different branches of government. As King John navigates these challenges, he must balance competing demands on his time and resources, prioritizing the defense of strategic locations and key infrastructure. The consequences of failure are severe, with potential losses for the kingdom's economy, politics, and social order. In this context, King John's decisions about resource allocation, naval deployment, and communication strategies take on added significance as he seeks to mitigate risks and protect English interests. King John of England assembles a naval force to defend against a French invasion. Bad storms disperse unfolded through interacting constraints rather than one isolated trigger. Decision-makers operated within institutional limits, and each response narrowed the next available option. The evidence points to compounding risk rather than a single dramatic cause. That causal chain becomes clearer when incentives, governance, and timing are read together. Lines, the naval force's struggles with navigation and communication, highlight the complexities of decision-making in times of crisis. The king's advisors, led by Hubert de Burgh, played a crucial role in shaping his responses to the challenges facing the navy. The limitations imposed by the stormy weather also raised questions about the adequacy of England's maritime infrastructure, including its ports and shipbuilding capacity. King John's decisions about resource allocation had significant implications for the kingdom's economy, as the naval force's needs competed with those of other sectors, such as agriculture and trade. The consequences of failure were not limited to military defeat, they also threatened the social order, as a French invasion could have led to widespread displacement and instability. Hubert de Burgh, in particular, emerged as a key figure in advising King John on matters related to naval defense and resource allocation. In contrast to the king's own limitations, de Burgh's expertise allowed him to navigate the complex institutional landscape of medieval England with greater ease. The implications of this period extend beyond the immediate crisis, shaping future English foreign policy and maritime development for generations to come. Lines, the sequence of events begins in May 1214, when King John is informed about a possible French invasion. Hubert de Burgh's influence on the king's decisions becomes more pronounced as he advises caution and resourcefulness in response to the threat. De Burgh's expertise in naval defense leads him to propose a series of measures to bolster England's maritime capabilities, including investments in shipbuilding and port infrastructure. However, his recommendations are met with resistance from other members of the King's Council, who favor more traditional approaches to warfare. The debate highlights the tension between de Burgh's practical experience and the theoretical knowledge of the courtiers. As the threat of invasion grows, King John is forced to make difficult decisions about resource allocation, weighing the needs of the naval force against those of other sectors. In August 1214, a critical meeting takes place at Portsmouth, where de Burgh presents his proposals for naval reform in greater detail. The meeting marks a turning point in the central event as King John begins to shift his priorities towards maritime development and resource allocation. But even with de Burgh's guidance, the king's decisions are not without their challenges and uncertainties. The impact of these events would be felt for generations to come, shaping the course of English foreign policy and maritime development. Lines, the accumulation of pressure on King John continued to build in the autumn of 1214 as news arrived that a large French fleet had been spotted off the coast of Normandy. The King's Council, led by Hubert de Burgh, was forced to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries between English barons, who were divided over their support for the monarch's policies. The strain on England's economy was becoming increasingly evident as the kingdom struggled to finance its military efforts while also meeting the needs of a growing population. In September 1214, King John made a crucial decision to divert resources from the royal court to support the naval force, but this move was met with resistance from some members of his council who feared it would undermine their own power and influence. The debate highlighted the deepening rift between de Burgh's practical approach and the more theoretical views of the courtiers, who remained wedded to traditional notions of warfare. As tensions mounted, King John became increasingly isolated as he struggled to balance competing demands from his advisors, nobles, and commoners. In a bid to shore up support, de Burgh proposed a series of measures to address the grievances of English barons, including concessions on taxation and land reform. However, these overtures were rejected by many, who saw them as inadequate or even treacherous, further eroding trust in the monarch's ability to lead the kingdom through this period of crisis. The consequences of failure were now palpable, with widespread displacement and instability threatening not just the social order but also the very fabric of English society. In a desperate bid to salvage the situation, King John turned to more drastic measures, including the use of mercenaries and forced conscription, but these only served to fuel further discontent among his subjects. The outcome was now all but certain. A French invasion would soon put England's fragile infrastructure to the ultimate test. The French invasion force, led by King Philip II, brother Robert of Artois, landed in England in May 1216, sparking widespread panic and chaos across the kingdom. The English nobility was divided, with some rushing to support King John while others deserted him or even allied themselves with the invaders. As the French army advanced, they were met with fierce resistance from English barons who had been secretly preparing for such an eventuality. The most notable of these was Henry de Bohun, 1st Earl of Hereford, who led a contingent of troops in a series of skirmishes against the French. Despite initial setbacks, the invaders pressed on, capturing key strongholds and fortresses along the way. King John's forces were ultimately forced to retreat, leaving behind a trail of destruction and desolation in their wake. The economic consequences of the invasion were severe, with trade and commerce grinding to a halt as merchants and traders fled from the conflict zone. The kingdom's already strained finances were pushed to the breaking point, threatening the very fabric of English society. In response to the crisis, King John was forced to issue emergency ordinances, which granted sweeping powers to his council in an effort to contain the chaos. However, these measures only served to further erode trust in the monarch's ability to lead, as many saw them as draconian and oppressive. The aftermath of the invasion saw a dramatic shift in the balance of power within England, with the French occupation leaving behind a legacy of resentment and mistrust that would take years to heal. The English nobility was forced to re-evaluate its alliances and loyalties, leading to a period of instability and realignment that would shape the course of English history for generations to come. The invasion also had far-reaching consequences for governance in England, as King John's council struggled to adapt to the new reality of French occupation. The king himself was forced to flee his throne, leaving behind a power vacuum that would be filled by a series of regents and caretaker governments. The eventual restoration of order would require a delicate balancing act between competing interests and factions, with the English monarchy emerging from the crisis forever changed. Thanks for listening to Underwire History. Look forward to seeing you next time.